This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome once again from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name, of course, Stephen Jensen. This show is always live and broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now, but the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. Now today, we look at the mining sector here in South Africa that's facing a huge jobs crisis. Our question of the day asks of you, how do we avoid massive job cuts in the mining sector in South Africa? At SABC Newsroom is where you interact with us. Now, Zimbabwe faces a similar problem. We'll get an update on the situation there as well. Later, we turn our attention to Turkey as the country is now on its highest terror alert following increased bombing of ISIS targets there. We also look at solar power in West Africa, post-traumatic stress disorder, and we close with a look at infertility in the developing world. First, the day's news with Anine Doma.
Good morning, I'm Anine Doma. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. Archbishop Desmond Tutu is back in hospital and is expected to stay in bed over the next few days. Tutu was readmitted to a Cape Town hospital after complaining of discomfort. The 83-year-old popular cleric was readmitted after being treated for a persistent infection. Tutu's daughter, Reverend Mpho Tutu, will be interviewed on this channel after 10 this morning. The Ministers of Police and Public Works will appear before Parliament's ad hoc committee on Nkandla today. Following an on-site visit to President Jacob Zuma's private home, members of the committee have called the two ministers back to clarify some issues. The committee was established to look into Minister Nathi Nhlekho's report on whether President Zuma should repay any money for the controversial non-security upgrades. A trial of 9 police officers implicated in the death of taxi driver Mito Masia will continue today. Yesterday, the High Court in Pretoria was shown a new video of Masia's arrest. The clip shows how agitated the Mozambican taxi driver was before being dragged down a Davidson Street by a police van. In an exclusive interview with the SABC in Mozambique, Masia's mother spoke frankly about the death of her son. Zimbabwe says US President Barack Obama did not exclude President Robert Mugabe from his AU address. This as the current chairperson of the African Union was not scheduled to attend the AU meeting. Obama addressed the African Union Commission yesterday. Zimbabwe's Permanent Secretary for Foreign Affairs says there was no issue of a snub as Obama had a bilateral visit to 2 states, of which one was Ethiopia, which happens to host the headquarters of the AU. Meanwhile, the US president concluded his visit to East Africa by saying Africa's democratic progress is at risk when leaders refuse to step aside at the end of their term.
When a leader tries to change the rules in the middle of the game just to stay in office, it risks instability and strife, as we've seen in Burundi.
And the cricket world continues to mourn the passing of former South African captain Clive Rice. New Zealand legend Sir Richard Hadlee has paid tribute to Rice, describing him as one of the greatest cricketers never to have played a test match. The leading all-rounder recently underwent treatment for a brain tumour. He died yesterday at the age of 66. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anine. Now, massive retrenchments are looming rather large in the South African mining industry. Anglo-American and Lonmin have both unveiled plans to shed jobs, citing financial difficulties due to a drop in the price of commodities and increased wage demands, they say. Anglo-American is anticipating doing away with 6,000 jobs by the end of this year as part of their plan to reduce 54,000 by 2018. Platinum producer Lonmin plans to cut 6,000 jobs. Erratic power supply, they say, is another reason being put forward by these mining giants for the move. The recent retrenchments is on top of 35,000 retrenchments which have already taken place in the mining sector as a whole since 2012. Government and workers' unions have urged mining houses to consider alternative options to counteract the looming massive retrenchments. Now, joining us in studio is political and economic analyst Israel Mkhize. Very good morning to you, Israel. Thanks for joining us.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
Massive retrenchments looming. We've seen the government's pronouncements on it. We've seen the pronouncements from the unions and so forth. How do you read the situation as it stands right now?
Well, the problem is very dynamic in terms of economic realism coming out. For instance, on one hand, you have what we call labor theory of value cropping up as to what is the value of the compensation for labor. Is it what labor puts in, or is it the usefulness of the product to the market? And on the other hand, you've got the market, finance market, so to speak, money market realism, where the employer, the bosses there in the mining sector, have to consider the books, the balance sheet, and the financials, and see if it's making good business sense to continue in the way they're losing. Because currently they're making prolonged losses due to the low demand in commodity. Number two, rising labor cost. The tension here is that when you are striking, for instance, as a labor movement and saying you want the employer to up your income, maybe by 4% or 6%, whatever percentage, that will have to be taken from the profits that the employer is making. So the employer will say, if then I'm running at a cost, at a loss, how can I actually up your remuneration? So if I'm going to have to run at a loss, I'm going to have to cut on jobs so that I continue to make profit for myself and for the shareholder. So it's the tension between the realism of labor market, its demand for a better remuneration on their labor, and also the financial market realism of the employer to say we need to make profit.
The SG's come out this week, Gwede Mantashe, and he talked about the cyclical nature of commodity prices and the like, and that the mining houses have a responsibility to the country to be responsible when they go down this route. How do you read this kind of intervention?
Well, the question is, what type of responsibility? Is it moral responsibility? Is business out there for moral responsibility or for profit making? Because the rationale of business is to make profit. If you look at South African economy, between 2000 and 2012, there was a boom in the mining sector. But if you look at the unemployment statistics, they stayed at 24 to 25%. So the unemployment was high, but there was a boom in the mining sector, which means there is no correlation necessarily between how much the mining sector is making in there. So what he's saying is,
surely mining can't be put in the same category as retail. Surely, if we go back to the Freedom Charter, what is under the earth belongs to all of us, and there's a certain responsibility when you're making money that we should also look at the fabric of our society.
Of course, that's how it's supposed to be. That's the ought. But the actuality of it is that the structure of the mining sector, it's based on primary extraction. It does not progress to secondary, which means transforming the raw material into a processed good and into tertiary, which means the global distribution. Because if we had that three-tier of primary, secondary and tertiary flow of the mining sector, we would have a bunch of these people whose jobs sadly stand on the line would be diversified maybe into the secondary, where you say, let's take the 9,000 people who stand to be retrenched to be located in the processing of this gold. But these commodities are shipped raw as they are. Then the secondary and tertiary transformation of raw material to final good happen in another context and in another market.
I want to shift the focus to the mining or the union bosses that are at odds with each other. We've seen the dawn of new union movements that have caused much consternation, much fighting within the union sector, call it that, in South Africa. How much responsibility must they take for the current strife when you look at the kind of demands that they're making, 90% increases, 100% increases? It's unheard of, not just in South Africa, but globally.
Of course, yeah. Well, it's the nature of the bargaining process that they would have that give and take, have an impasse. Sometime if there's a disagreement, go back to their people. But they are trying to push that, okay, look, we want a maximum share of what's possible. But as you are saying, market-related compensation, that's the rationale of the bosses. They would say, look, where have you heard of a 100% increase in terms of remuneration? But what we need to study and perhaps reflect on is the American 1970 period boom in the coal industry and the bust that happened just after 1980, and look at how the policymakers, the acts, the mining company, the chamber, and as well as the Department of Mining, how they need to be able to be strong in terms of forward thinking of how do they they play a role of being a referee, so to speak, that makes sense of the market rationality when they're thinking, because market thinks on the bottom line.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the unions, unfortunately, there's a lot of politics playing there. Everyone, you've got NUM, you've got AMCU there, and you've got non-aligned workers as well, who are pushing for high returns from whatever the bosses that are making for shareholders and themselves.
They talk about unsustainability. Unsustainability, say the bosses, and that's why we have the retrenchments that we have, and they're expecting more retrenchments. I want to go to our question of the day, and I want you to answer this because this is what we're asking our viewers. Can we pop up our question of the day? Going forward, it is, how do we avoid these job cuts in South Africa's mining sector going forward, according to you?
Well, as I said, that we are sadly only on the primary extraction focus. And it's a historical thing. If you look at the construction of the roads in Africa as a whole, they're more towards the ports and the ocean, because Africa
railways, everything to the ports, everything gets taken out of Africa.
Yeah. There has to be a transformation there in terms of the secondary and tertiary distribution of goods, where we develop and say, look, we've extracted this from our own soil. Let us transform it right here. Let's develop that secondary and tertiary. Then we distribute. Obviously, then we'll be able to set a good price for the market when we've got the final product. Then to export raw material, then it comes back to us at a very steep price.
It's unfortunately the legacy of colonialism, where we see the rail networks across the continent only towards one place, and that's to the ports, to take out all of the resources that we have to the ports here in South Africa. So you say we have to find a way to make the raw materials, to transform the raw materials, not just in South Africa, but on the African continent.
Absolutely, because the commodities in Africa is not just gold. You've got platinum, you've got oil, you've got a number of...
iron ore, steel, everything.
Exactly, because it's going to give us two problems if we don't fix that. The first one is going to not just be cyclical, as you mentioned, but the structural problem that when structural unemployment is that when we retrench all these people, which is very sad, you'd find that there's going to be a very serious skills match. You're going to have a 55,000 recently retrenched labour force whose skills match with wherever they're going to be seeking employment is not going to be matching, because their skills have been developed to the extraction. And then number two, the political problem, because you see now that even the launch of some political parties have been oriented around the mining sector, the grievances there. And that's why there's a serious statement from the Lekgotla of the ruling party, because we know that next year is the election year. And that's one area that you just want to be careful on, that you don't have a bunch of heads of families and so on who are retrenched and going through economic depression at family level, microeconomic level. So, because that's going to affect how the voting would.
It's a very, very delicate balance, and we're heading into very interesting times. Israel, I thank you for joining us, giving us unique insight, political and economic analyst Israel Mkhize. Thanks for joining us. I just want to tell you, it's not only confined to South Africa. Retrenchments, that is, across the board in Zimbabwe. Authorities are also scrambling to introduce new labour laws to prevent thousands more jobs from being lost in the mining sector. There we were going to speak to Shinga Nyoka about this. There's been a landmark ruling there in the Supreme Court. Hopefully we can get hold of her a little bit later. We are, unable getting hold of her right now. But last week, an estimated 2,000 jobs were terminated, and the prospects there are even bleak. Back here in South Africa. Oh, is she there? Shinga, good morning. Have you made it?
Good morning to you, Eben.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us. Just give us a quick update on the situation with regards to jobs and then the ruling in the Supreme Court.
Well, it appears that it can only get worse for Zimbabwean employees. The latest news that's come out of the Supreme Court is a second judgment. This particular one concerns the National Railways of Zimbabwe workers who had taken their employer to court over educational and housing loans. And what the Supreme Court has ruled is that allowances, for example, transport allowances, educational allowances, and housing allowances are not an absolute right for employees, and that the employer is not bound by any law to pay these to make these particular payouts to workers, and it only should be by agreement. And so really it appears that it can only get worse for employees, as what we've seen over the last 2 weeks is a gradual whittling away of the salary entitlements that they thought that they had been entitled to for all of these years.
Now, Shinga, I know you've been talking to some of the workers who've been affected. What has their reaction been thus far?
Well, given the economic crisis, there's a lot of concern about what is going to happen in this country over the next couple of months. So far, we understand about over 2,000 employees have been given their marching orders. That is, they've been given letters of termination for their employment contracts, and they're with just 3 months' notice and 3 months' salary. And obviously, there's a lot of concern because previous to that, retrenchment packages were the norm. There was quite a laborious process that employers had to go through to terminate employees' contracts. But the Supreme Court has ruled that there should be a degree of equality between employees and employers. And if employees can give a month's notice before they leave, that employers should also have the same rights, that the rights of the employee are not superior to those of the employers. And really this is what has sparked the massive job losses. What we understand is some companies have terminated contracts for all of their staff, all of their permanent staff, and that from now on they'll proceed on a 6-term contract, which obviously has huge implications for job security.
Shinga, thank you very much for joining us. Unfortunately, it looks like the line is starting to drop a little bit there. That's the line to Zimbabwe. We've been trying to get Shinga on Skype since about half an hour ago. Unfortunately, it seems we're having some technical difficulties there in Zimbabwe with regards to not just the phone line, but also the bandwidth and so forth. Now, top story here in South Africa today. South African Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu was hospitalized again yesterday with what the family calls a persistent infection, just a week after being discharged following treatment for the same ailment. Now, I can tell you at 10 o'clock this morning, Mpo Tutu, the daughter, will be live on SABC News to give us an update on the Arch's situation. Meanwhile, let's have a look at what you guys have been talking about with regards to the Arch on social media. Kirat Lala says Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu will remain in a Cape Town hospital until at least the weekend. Yes, that's the outlook thus far. Township Entrepreneur says we pray for Archbishop Desmond Tutu while he's in hospital in Cape Town for a speedy recovery. I hope you feel better soon, Bishop Tutu, says Eva Lotte Janssen. Seymour says we wish the Arch a speedy recovery, talking about Archbishop Desmond Tutu, of course, battling a persistent infection in a Cape Town hospital. At 10 o'clock this morning, Canon Mpo Tutu will be live on this very channel to give us an update on the Arch. She's at the hospital right now, and she's informed us that she'll be in our Sea Point studios at about 10 a.m. this morning. She'll be talking to Alvis. So if you want to know what's happening with the Arch, you make sure that you tune into this channel then. Now, time to look at our pick of the day. This one comes from Loyiso Twala, and it's captioned, "May Clive Rice, one of the greatest cricket players ever, rest in peace. Cancer, be not proud." Is the hashtag that he goes. That, of course, is an iconic picture. 1992 was the year when South Africa made their readmission. I think the ground in the background is Eden Gardens, where South Africa played their first match back in the international fold. What a memory that was for those of us that are old enough to can remember it. Now let's take a look at front pages from around the globe. We start in Europe, where the Times reports that 3,000 migrants stormed the Eurotunnel terminal in Calais in a single night, with a record number making their way to Britain yesterday. Moving to New York, the International New York Times, President Obama jabbed at the power structures of Africa yesterday by calling for long-entrenched leaders to step down, using off-the-cuff remarks about his own political standing and his stature as the first American president with African roots to try to reshape the continent's politics. Finally, in the UK, The Independent says the tourist who paid thousands of pounds to kill one of Zimbabwe's most cherished lions has been identified as an American dentist. What a shocking picture that is. Why do we have to? How do you get a kick out of killing such a beautiful animal? I just don't have that killer instinct, I suppose. Let's have a look now at what's happening here in our country, South Africa. We start in the capital, Pretoria, where we see 9 police officers implicated in the death of taxi driver Mido Masia will continue today. Video footage shows Masia being dragged down a Davidson Street in a police van, or by a police van rather. Then we move to Durban, where the man accused of attacking and raping 38-year-old female jogger in Harwich, KwaZulu-Natal, while she was out on a morning run. Well, he's expected to appear in the Durban High Court today. Time for us to take a short break. You're watching Newsroom right here on SABC News. Welcome back. This is Newsroom. Time for us to shift our focus to Turkey. Yesterday, the Turkish government was pressed at a special NATO meeting to adopt a proportionate response towards Kurdish militants and to not abandon the increasingly fragile peace process there. This after Turkey launched a 2-pronged cross-border offensive last week following a wave of violence that culminated in the killing of 32 people in Suruk on the 20th of July. Europe and the United States have since staked out different positions on the country's airstrikes, and tourists have been warned that the country faces a very high threat from the Islamic State as Turkey continues to launch air attacks on the terror group. Now, here to give us a bit more insight into this story, we are joined today by the spokesperson of the Kurdistan Communities Union, Roj Velat. A very good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, last week, I want to go back to last week and start. Last week, the Turkish government took a more active role in the US-led coalition fighting ISIS when it agreed to open its air bases for allied fighter jets to launch missions or bombing missions into northern Iraq. What are your views as the Kurds? What are your views on this, and how do you react following these attacks there?
Okay, I have to make a couple of points regarding to your first question. First of all, yes, the Turkey have opened its bases to USA in order to bomb the ISIS. However, we have to know and I know that you do know, that Turkey has played an important role on the formation of the ISIS and have been supporting the ISIS politically, militarily, and letting ISIS, and also logistically as well, for the last 3 years. Now what happened? What happened now? Turkey claims that they also attacking ISIS. We do not have any independent source saying that the Turkey is bombarding ISIS positions. Yeah. But we have a lot of information that Turkey bombarding Kurdish positions, matter of fact. Now, ISIS is a fascist organization who has been, as I said, formed by Turkey, logistically and militarily supported by Turkey for the last 3 years, and used this force against the Kurds in Rojava in order for the Kurds not to get any status within Syria. This was the reason. And when we look at the ISIS aim is to create a chaos and terror in the region. And they are targeting the different ethnic groups, including Kurds, Assyrians, Arabs, and different religions, including Islam as well.
I want to ask you, the Kurds have proved to be the most effective fighters against ISIS. Tell us about the strides that the Kurds have made in this fight in the last year or so.
Okay. The most effective forces who were fighting against, fighting and resisting against the ISIS attacks backed by Turkey, one is PKK guerrillas, and the other one, Kurdish forces called YPG forces within Syria, within the Kurdish areas of Syria. Now, I have to remind you that Turkey made last year, at the end of last year, General Security Council of Turkey had a meeting. During this meeting, they decided to end the resolution and peace process and de facto ceasefire, which was continuing for 2.5 years in between PKK and the Turkish government, to create a chaos and terror within Turkey, both against the Turkish people and the Kurds.
I want to ask you in conclusion, yesterday the Turkish president said that he can no longer continue with a peace process with Kurdish militants. How do you respond to this, and what is your plea to the Turkish government?
Erdogan has been on the power since 2002. Kurds, the Kurdish freedom struggle, which has been leading by the PKK. By the way, you also said PKK is a terrorist organization in your question.
Yes.
PKK is not a terrorist organization.
That's according to the Americans.
PKK is leading a freedom struggle for the Kurdish people, and Kurdish people sees PKK as their leadership towards the freedom. I have to say this. And secondly, Erdogan government since 2002 have not done anything in order to open a peaceful, democratic solution for the Kurdish issue. But Kurdish side since then have been insisting to be able to Kurdish issue to be solved through means of democracy, freedom and dialogue.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, Mr. Velat. I thank you for joining us today to talk about this emotive issue. I'm sure that there'll be many, many conversations ahead over this in the weeks and months to come. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you very much. Just to add something, seems like here in South Africa do not have enough information about Turkey, about Kurdish issue, and the approach of Erdogan. So I suggest there should be other programs in order to talk about the developments in land. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've run out of time now. We have to move on, unfortunately. Tributes continue to pour in for cricket legend Clive Rice, who died yesterday at the age of 66 after suffering along with a brain tumour. Here are some of the views. They've been wide and many views and pictures on social media. We've picked a few to share with you. Nitin Shrivastava says, rest in peace, Clive Rice, who will be remembered as an unexplored cricketing great who got in political decisions of his times, got caught in political decisions of his times. Tony Martin says, rest in peace, Clive Rice. What a talented all-rounder you truly were. Such a legend and a privilege to watch. Such sad news about Clive Rice. Remember him well in the county circuit. A tough, no-nonsense cricketer who will be sorely missed. Rest in peace, Clive Rice, the first captain of the Proteas. Thank you for your contribution. That's the official word from Cricket South Africa. Yes, who can forget the day that we came back in 1992, back into international cricket with a 3-match series in India. We showed you the picture there a little bit earlier. What a memory it was. Now, Africa is facing a serious energy crisis, and in some countries, an estimated 20% of the population are without direct access to electricity. This situation is worse in rural areas where 4 out of 5 people on the continent are without electricity. The amount of people in Africa that still depend on inefficient traditional energy sources is higher than anywhere else in the world. There's great growth potential here in Africa, but while power sectors faces many challenges, there is a silver lining. Norwegian power producer Skatex Solar, together with the government of Mali, are building the first large-scale solar plant in West Africa. Now, joining us via Skype from France is the general manager of Skatex Solar in France and the West African region, Paul-Francois Gauvin. A very good morning to you, Mr. Gauvin. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning to you.
This solar plant is the first of its kind in West Africa. Just tell us, why was Mali chosen for this specific project?
When we look at it 4 to 5 years ago, what we needed was, of course, sun, also grid capacity, and a demand that would show the way. And in Mali, there was also a good awareness of solar and political willingness. So when we decided to move into Mali, we had also the support, a very strong support of the World Bank group, and also from climate change funds. So this is the main reason why Mali.
Do you believe that solar energy is a major answer to the energy problems we face on the African continent?
Yes, obviously it's not the only answer, but what is very important is that sun is available, and also the price of electricity coming from solar has been so much down over the last few years that now it's clearly under the EV fuel production price and cost.
Now, the project, I understand, so is set to take 25 years. That's certainly a long-term view. How is it going to help Mali economically and also train young people in this project?
That's a very important point. First of all, in a country like Mali, what electricity, additional electricity is bringing is enormous. You have to think about the amount of workshops, factories, businesses that will have electricity that they don't have today. So the impact on employment is extremely important for a country like Mali. So this would probably be the most important factor for Mali, is new electricity for businesses, and this, of course, means development.
And what are the long-term benefits for the Mali economy?
Yes, well, new business means new capacity of development. And from an employment perspective, this is a major an issue. And furthermore, you mentioned something about training and education, maybe in your questions. This also is very important because the maintenance and the operation in Mali will be entirely done by Malian people and staff, and therefore the training and education and opportunity to work in electricity will be increased very much.
Merci, monsieur. That is Paul-Francois Gauvin coming to us live from Mali via Skype, giving us, actually from France via Skype, giving us an update on a massive solar plant that they're building in Mali there. It's a 25-year project that's going to really help to alleviate the energy problems that they have in that country, but also in the wider West African region. Now, time for us to take a look at our tweet pick. Now, this one comes from our very own Dr. Dlamini Zuma saying, We must all work to build greater tolerance for religious, cultural and political diversity and build inclusive society. Hashtag on a tweet, Obama visits the AU. Yes, that's the sentiment, of course, of our own Dr. Dlamini Zuma, who heads up the AU, mind you. Now, let's take a look at what's happening on our Newsroom Facebook page. Of course, Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Energy wants the entire board of Petro SA to resign and be reconstituted to rescue the state oil company. Then a Libyan court yesterday sentenced Muammar Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam, and 8 others to death over war crimes, including killing of protesters during the 2011 revolution that ended his father's rule. And the Pakistani police killed the leader of a sectarian militant group, his 2 sons and 11 others earlier today during a shootout after gunmen attacked the police convoy and freed him as he was being moved. Now, for more news updates, of course, put Newsroom, SABC Newsroom, in the search bar. We'll pop up and you'll get all the latest news all the time. Now, it's been a tough week for South African cricket. We saw about Clive Rice a little earlier. Now, Cape Town and Ravensmead in particular will be mourning the death of legendary administrator Nico van Oort. Van Oort, former Vice Rector, Registrar of Student Affairs at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, was an administrative icon of Western Province cricket for several decades. He was a stalwart of non-racialism. Van Oort was a SACOS man through and through, an administrator that lived by the principles of no normal sport in an abnormal society. Time for us to take a break. You're watching Newsroom right here on SABC News.
From humble beginnings, this selfless icon altered the history of the world, freed a country, and united a nation. He taught us humility and forgiveness. To the world, he is Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. But to us, he is simply Tata Madiba.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. Archbishop Desmond Tutu is back in hospital and is expected to stay in bed over the next few days. Tutu was readmitted to a Cape Town hospital after complaining of discomfort. His daughter, Reverend Mpho Tutu, will be interviewed on this channel after 10 this morning. The Minister of Police and Public Works will appear before Parliament's ad hoc committee on Nkandla today. Following an on-site visit to President Jacob Zuma's private home, members of the committee have called the two ministers to clarify some issues. The committee was established to look into Mr. Nkandla Nkleko's report on whether President Zuma should repay any money for the controversial non-security upgrades. And the cricket world continues to mourn the passing of former South African captain Clive Rice. New Zealand's legend Sir Richard Hadlee has paid tribute to Rice, describing him as one of the greatest cricketers never to have played a test match. Remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for SABC Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben, back to you.
Thank you very much, Janine. Now, Warrant Officer Morne du Toit, one of the official police photographers at Reeva Steenkamp's death scene, recently turned to the High Court in Pretoria in a bid to force the South African Police Service to place him on medical pension. Du Toit, who had already been suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder at the time, says the Oscar murder scene still haunts him. In this case, medical pension was granted, but subsequently withdrawn after the SAPS claimed he did paid work while on medical leave. The diagnosis of depression in our police force is, however, not anything new. In 2013, the police ministry said more than 10,000 police officers suffered from depression and nearly 3,000 from post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, to talk to us a little bit more about this issue, we are joined by specialist psychiatrist Dr. Danella Eliasov. A very good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, just in 30 seconds, tell us what it is.
Okay, so it's a constellation of symptoms that somebody who's either experienced or been in close contact with or heard about a very traumatic or stressful event may or may not manifest. So these symptoms can include hyperarousal, so being kind of on edge all the time,
Yeah.
Easily startled, flashbacks, re-experiencing of the trauma, even, long after the trauma has actually occurred.
Mm-hmm.
Certain alterations in their mood and their way of thinking, so negative thoughts about themselves, about the future, sometimes reckless behavior, self-destructive behavior, even alterations in memory, so either complete, lack of memory for certain events around the trauma. So quite a diverse range of symptoms, and these result in social and occupational dysfunction for that individual.
Now, in this case, we're focusing on Warrant Officer Morne du Toit, who turned to the High Court. I want to ask you about this case in particular. He was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder more than 2 years before he visited that traumatic scene that we've all kind of saw in this court case that's now on screens. But why do we then, the SAPS in this case, why do you send somebody who's got this disorder to these kinds of scenes? Is that common?
It is common. I mean, in our country, unfortunately, a lot of us are subjected to violent crime, both in the medical field and in the law enforcement sector. So I would imagine it's quite difficult in terms of understaff and that kind of thing, that you would be able to not send a policeman into such a scene again. And it happens all the time. People are re-traumatized.
We saw the numbers, 10,000 suffering from depression, 3,000 from post-traumatic stress and so forth. Does that make our police force dangerous?
Does that make our police force dangerous? Well, not necessarily, because having post-traumatic stress disorder doesn't necessarily make you incompetent or dangerous. It's more that your quality of life is impaired. And maybe, possibly, your judgment could be impaired in that you wouldn't do your work as well as you could be doing. But possibly to say that it makes our police force dangerous, I think, might be a bit of an extreme statement.
Counselling, I mean, we all need counselling, I suppose, in this life. I've discovered that recently. In this case, counselling, can it help? Can you overcome these kinds of problems? A friend of mine, as a military man, 20 years later, he's still battling with post-traumatic stress. Can you overcome this?
So you should be able to. So there's a lot of good evidence for certain treatments. So the best evidence in terms of medication, there's certain antidepressants that work well. In terms of therapy, the biggest sort of evidence base would be for something called cognitive behavioral therapy. So those, really have been shown to reverse some of the symptoms. Unfortunately, there are certain therapies can actually make it worse. So certain kinds of debriefing, when the person's not actually ready or when the counsellor is not qualified, it's been shown to actually exacerbate the symptoms.
That's very...
So it's about access to good care, not just,
not just any care. And it's not just, you just don't need somebody to talk to, I suppose.
No, it's actually a lot sort of more complicated than that. But it's something that is treatable, and we're hoping, in most cases can be.
Now, we saw the Oscar thing. Unfortunately, we can't get past the Oscar thing, it seems. I wanted to ask you, the irony, Oscar is coming out for killing a woman during Women's Month, which is next month. How do you see him integrating himself back into society? Do you think it'll be a seamless or difficult process?
I would imagine it would be a difficult process. Obviously, not knowing, never having interviewed him myself or met him. But unfortunately, most research, most statistics shows our prisons don't really rehabilitate particularly well. And that it actually can be a huge adjustment coming out of prison. Also, on the background of that, he himself was diagnosed with a post-traumatic stress disorder. It's going to be, I think, a challenge for him coming out.
Well, I thank you for joining us today. We've run out of time. Dr. Daniela Eliasov joining us. We're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. Of course, Warrant Officer Morne de Toy, well, he says he suffered because of the Riva death scene. But there are many more police officers that suffer from this disorder, more than 3,000, they say, and 10,000 others suffer from depression. I thank you for joining us to give us your unique insights on this. That's Dr. Daniela Eliasov joining us this morning. Now, in conclusion, many infertile women in developing countries consider that without children, their lives have no meaning. According to the World Health Organization, more than 180 million couples in developing countries, that's 1 in every 4 couples, suffer from primary or secondary infertility. Infertility holds strong cultural beliefs in many African cultures, and South Africa is no different. Last month, the University of Nairobi, together with Merck, launched a campaign called More Than a Mother, in an aim to educate and assist communities. But to talk to us about infertility here in South Africa is Dr. Mervyn Jacobson, a specialist in reproductive medicine and a medical director at VitaLab South Africa. He's joining us via Skype from Johannesburg, mind you. He had a last-minute scenario to sort out, so he couldn't join us here in the studio. Very good morning to you, Dr. Jacobson.
And to you, and thank you for inviting me.
Doctor, although education and technology has improved drastically over the last, I would say, 10 years, women who are still blamed for failing to produce children. Why is the social stigma so strongly believed, especially here in South Africa?
This is a cultural thing, and I am very quick to point out that it's not especially in South Africa. South Africa, yes, does suffer from the stigma, and it's a very important issue, and we're not diminishing it at all. But in fact, the Central African countries have it as bad, if not worse. And women are discriminated against, women are ostracized, women are stigmatized if they are unable to produce children. They are regarded as a burden on their community and a socio-economic dysfunction in their societies. So in practical terms, not specifically South Africa, and in fact much more so in the Central African countries.
A report by the World Health Organization found that 85% of women in developing countries are more likely to experience infertility compared to only 33% in the rest of the sort of wider world. What do you think are the main causes for this high infertility rate in the developing world?
Well, again, I need to correct that perspective, because the national report that was put out by the WHO at the end of 2012 shows that in fact it's 15% of couples, and there is that are requiring a first child, and that incidence is higher in those women who are looking for a second pregnancy. It goes up to at least 30% in the age group between 25 and 45 years of age. So I think the 95% is a little bit distorted.
Yeah.
The other factor that's very impressive is in that article that they have shown that the incidence of infertility has come down between 1990 and 2010, which was their period of observation and calculation, and it has diminished, in fact, from 2.7% overall in the population groups that you're referring to 1.9%. So it appears that education and the improvement of facilities has started to change the incidence and the ravages of infertility.
Well, I thank you for joining us. We've run out of time, unfortunately. Thank you, Dr. Jacobson. Join us on Skype from his office here in Johannesburg. He couldn't join us in studio. Thank you once again for joining us, sir.
Not at all. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, that's where we have to wrap it this morning. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. Remember, don't forget, we also stream live on YouTube at that time, where the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You have been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.